Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a concept today that honestly touches absolutely every single one of us at some point. We're going to unpack the fascinating and, yeah, sometimes really difficult art of letting go. We're exploring a deeply profound piece of writing that looks at exactly why things in our lives, even the most beautiful, wonderful things, can actually turn sour if we don't know how to handle them. Let's get right into it.
You know that feeling when something totally beautiful just slowly becomes unpleasant? Think about your absolute favorite meal for a second. If someone forced you to eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day, that amazing dish would get completely boring, right? Or what about a song? We've all done this, found an incredible new song, played it on loop for a week straight, until suddenly, just hearing those first few notes actually gets on your nerves. The source material we're looking at today points out that this doesn't just happen with food or music. It happens with situations and, yes, even with people we deeply care about, especially when there's just no space to breathe.
So, this brings us to a brilliantly quirky old Portuguese proverb: a guest and a fish stink in 3 days. Now, at first glance, that's pretty funny. Honestly, it might even sound a little bit rude. But tucked inside this weird, blunt saying is just an incredibly powerful truth about life and human nature. It introduces this idea that absolutely everything has a natural limit. A visit, a friendship, a great romance, these can all be extraordinary. But when something refuses to leave its proper place, even something wonderful can slowly turn into a burden. Section 1, the 3-day rule. Let's actually unpack the literal metaphors inside this proverb, starting with a guest. Imagine a guy visiting his friend. Day 1, fresh and happy. The family welcomes him, they make amazing food, they're swapping stories. The house is just full of laughter. It's perfect. Then we hit day 2. Still acceptable. The guest is totally welcome, conversations are flowing, memories are being made. But then we arrive at day 3. The stink begins. Something just subtly shifts. The guest starts acting like he basically owns the place, he expects to be served, takes things for granted, and stops acting like a visitor. Slowly, that initial warmth vanishes, and the family is quietly wondering, when exactly is he heading out? And it is exactly the same with a fish. Day 1, it's fresh. Day 2, acceptable. Day 3, it decays. It didn't magically become a different creature, it just stayed in the same condition for way too long. And here is the absolute kicker. The problem isn't that it is bad, it simply stayed beyond its time. That is such a huge light bulb moment. Notice that in the story of the house guest, no massive disaster happened. There wasn't some huge betrayal or a screaming match in the living room. The only problem was incredibly simple. He just stayed too long. The situation was perfect for a specific amount of time, and then that time expired. Section 2, why perfection isn't permanent. So let's zoom out from fish and house guests to our own lives. Perfection does not mean permanence. We all seem to have this massive misconception that if something is perfect, it literally has to last forever. But the source material beautifully argues the exact opposite. A beautiful moment is beautiful partly because it ends. Think about it. A sunset is gorgeous because it doesn't just hang around all day. A vacation is special because you do eventually have to pack up and go home. A celebration feels deeply meaningful precisely because it's temporary. If everything lasted forever, nothing would feel special. Sometimes the sheer beauty of a thing exists entirely because it has a finish line. This idea totally applies to our relationships too. Think of it like this. A flower cannot grow if you're constantly pulling it out of the dirt to check its roots. A bird literally cannot fly if you never let it leave the nest. And most importantly, a relationship cannot breathe without space. So many of us believe that love means being together constantly, knowing everything, sharing every single waking second. But even love needs boundaries. Sometimes distance doesn't destroy love. Distance is actually the very thing that allows love to stay healthy. Closeness is beautiful, but too much closeness without any space, that just becomes suffocation. Think of it like reading a really incredible book. You finally reach the last page of a great chapter, but instead of turning the page to see what happens next, you just keep reading the exact same paragraph again and again and again. You know the story has moved forward, but you flat out refuse to move with it. The text points out that this is exactly what so many of us do with our lives. We stay trapped in old chapters. We hold on to a childhood version of ourselves, or an old heartbreak, maybe a past failure, or even a dream that honestly just doesn't inspire us anymore. We keep telling ourselves, well, this is who I am. But actually, you might just be standing in a room you've already totally outgrown. Section 3, perseverance versus attachment. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Wait, should I just quit everything the second it gets a little stale? Not at all. We really need to clarify a massive difference here. The proverb does not mean you should just abandon everything quickly or bail whenever things get tough. Life takes patience, it takes effort, but there is a very stark contrast between perseverance and attachment. Perseverance says, hey, this is difficult, but it is worth continuing. That's strength. Attachment, on the other hand, says, this is hurting me, but I am too afraid to let go. Attachment is entirely rooted in fear. So the question you need to ask yourself isn't always, can I stay? The better question is often, should I stay? Because here's the harsh but absolutely necessary truth. Survival is not the same as living. You are highly capable. You can survive in a lot of places that are honestly no longer meant for you. You can stay in situations, in jobs, in relationships, way past the point where they've stopped helping you grow. You can survive the proverbial stinking fish. But just because you can survive it doesn't mean you're actually living.
Section 4. Knowing when to leave. So how do we actually apply all of this? How do we stop just surviving those old chapters? It comes down to one of the hardest skills in human existence. The author of our source text provides this deeply empowering list, and I really want you to let these sink in. There is something profoundly powerful about leaving before you're forced out. Leave a conversation before anger turns into cruelty. Leave a party before joy turns into exhaustion. Leave an argument before love becomes hatred. Leave a relationship before respect completely disappears. Leave a job before your soul becomes empty. Leave a chapter before it turns into a prison. A lot of people don't suffer because they walked into the wrong situation. They suffer because they refused to leave when the situation had already organically ended. There is absolute dignity in knowing when enough is enough.
It totally reframes the whole idea of leaving. Not every door has to be slammed shut. Some doors can literally just be closed gently, and that is such a comforting thought, isn't it? Admitting that something is over isn't a tragedy, and it's not a betrayal. It's actually a sign of maturity. You can be incredibly grateful for what something gave you. You can fully appreciate the past, and you can still choose to move on. You can love someone and understand you can't be together anymore. Sometimes the absolute bravest thing you can do is look at a situation and say, wow, this was beautiful, but it's over.
Which brings us to one final, really provocative question to end our explainer today. I want you to ask yourself, is it still good for me now? Not, was it good for me 5 years ago? Or was it good in the beginning? Is it still good for you now? A place that once gave you a ton of peace can eventually become the very place that keeps you stuck. A dream that inspired you can become a cage. Think back to the guest in the fish. Please don't wait until something beautiful becomes bitter before you learn to let it go. Leave while the memory is still warm. Leave while gratitude is still an option. Because sometimes the absolute most beautiful way to honor something is just knowing when it's time to leave it behind. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this. Take a look at your own life this week, and don't be afraid to gently close the doors on the chapters you've already outgrown.